Entrepreneur, author, and financial consultant Mark Bernstein helps high-performing entrepreneurial business owners create a vision for the future and follow through on their goals and intentions. Ange Honorato is a business growth strategist who blends psychology and business together to create conscious leaders and business owners who impact the world. Founders Forum is a radio show podcast sharing the real stories behind entrepreneurship as founders discover more about themselves while providing valuable lessons and some fun and entertainment for you. Now, here's Mark and Ange.
Good morning, America. Good morning, Philadelphia. Good morning, world. And good morning, Arlo. Always have to say good morning to Arlo. We are here today. Our founder today that we have on is we're very privileged to have Daria Torres today of Walls Torres Group. And we will introduce her properly in a moment. But we have to say it's Philadelphia, and it's the day after the Phillies did not win the National League Championship. And I did predict not only that they'd win the championship, but they'd win the World Series, and I had good reasons to believe that. But things don't always go the way you hope or the way you want. So collectively, Ange is in the studio with me today as well, and collectively there is a sadness hanging over us about that. And there's also a lot of sadness in the world all the time, but particularly now. So I just wanted to ask both of you, Ange, good morning.
Good morning.
And also Daria.
Good morning.
Good morning. Your feelings, first of all, on the Phillies, which is minor compared to some of the other sadness going on, but still a thing for us. It's a Philly thing. It's a sports city thing. So, how do you balance that sadness with we're all going to be productive today and put on our best faces? How do you both handle that?
Well, I'll start off.
Sure.
Thank you, both Mark and Ange, for the invitation to be here today. Really appreciate it.
Our pleasure.
I was out last night with some friends, and, we were...
I did see a picture of your shirt.
That's right. That's right. It had 3 strikes, you're out, and I was hoping it would go the other way, that your prediction would come true. But I think to your question, there are times when we are disappointed with an outcome, and sometimes we have no control over that outcome. And sometimes we do. And I think what's important is to recognize what you do have control over and to look over the horizon and say, what can I do next time when I'm faced with a similar situation? What can I do in terms of conveying these insights to others? And let every mistake or shortfall be a setup for the comeback. All right, so hopefully next season we'll see that.
I love that. It is interesting how much we are invested, and I won't say I'm the biggest sports fan in the world. I love sports, but I'm not like some people. Yet, it does really affect you. You really get wrapped up in it, and then the other side of me says, "Hey, it's just a game. When you win some, you lose some, and that's the bottom line. That's sort of it." And when it's professional sports teams, we cannot control that. Even though I thought I could, I had all my best garb on. Arlo had his garb on. I had some great pictures. We were all ready to go. Because I felt the last loss was my fault because I didn't do that. But obviously I have no control.
Yeah, well, baseball's a very superstitious sport to begin with. But, I echo everything that you both said. But I think, any good sports city feels the same way. But Philly, we know it's a gritty blue collar. We bind together. It's a tough place. But for me, the levels of sadness were multifaceted because, I go back to my grandparents that were huge fans. I grew up as a kid. My mom's a fan. We have season tickets. I was at Game 6, third base side, right there, ready to, go to the championship, and it didn't happen. And so I'm still reeling from it. But I think the way that, I try to go back on my faith and say, like Daria just said, that, you get disappointed. And I think about the generations of young kids right now that are disappointed. But it's also a lesson, right? That we didn't win this one, but maybe that just means because the next thing that's coming is bigger and better, right? I have to kind of remind myself that, but I don't feel that at the moment.
True. It is hard to keep going back to the championship game every year, though. So that's the other thought.
Well, it sure is. But there's teams that have done it, and I think we're building a foundation for that. So
are we building a dynasty? That's the question. What happened to my mind?
Well, we just have to swing the bats more, right? Good metaphor.
So now let's talk about some of the other sadness in the world. We have a war going on in Ukraine that we tend to forget about, major thing because of the war in the Middle East, and we've got that going on. And those are things that in theory we can do something about. I was reading some things last night and this morning about ideas of what I'd like to try to do to help the situation in the Middle East, and I've tried to do some things to help in Ukraine. Do you see any different? There are differences, obviously, between that and losing a championship game. Any thoughts from either of you on that?
Well, I was thinking about something on the way in and hearing different sides of things, and I think, for me, and I think this ties really well into what we're going to talk about with our guest today, but it's difficult, I think, when you've got two different sides that firmly believe that their side is the only side. And how do you bridge a gap? In some ways, it goes back thousands of years. Where is the compromise, and how do you get people to come to the table? I think that's the biggest challenge we have right now.
You've got that going on in both conflicts, actually.
Absolutely.
Between Ukraine and Russia as well.
And it can feel like, when you're geographically so far removed from a situation like this, that there is little that you can do. But to the point we were talking about a little earlier, even before the show, how you can use your voice, how you can use your influence. There are certainly people in our circles, right, all of us, who are being touched by these situations. And if you demonstrate curiosity, if you demonstrate empathy, if you educate yourself on as much as you can about the situation, you're going to be in a much better position to show concern and to lean in and support where you can.
I'm tending to lean towards humanitarian aid in both situations because no matter what else happens, there are many people who are the victims of the political differences, which is a shame, but seems to be the way of the world for
it has to be
thousands
humanity.
of years.
It has to be team humanity, in my mind.
That and certainly and hospitals, healthcare, right? Because of all the atrocious injuries that are occurring, let alone the fatalities. So there always is going to be that medical relief need as well.
Well, right. I consider that part of, maybe it's not technically, but I consider that part of the human need, if not humanitarian need. So, Daria Torres, let's talk about you. Daria founded the Walls Torres Group, and prior to that, she was a top-secret SCI-cleared systems engineer with Lockheed Martin. We got to talk a little bit about that experience this morning. She serves on the board of Columbia Bank and is an advisor to several rapidly scaling logistic-oriented enterprises. In between that, which I didn't mention, she did start a consulting company and is additionally a director on several boards, a university lecturer, an executive-level advisor with over 2 decades of multi-sector management consulting experience. And we talked about the logistics aspect of it because I think that was something you learned as an engineer and it carried over in your consulting practice. Do you want to comment on that before we get into your story?
Sure. So just logistics is probably just a fancier word to explain the complexity that takes place within systems that are moving things from one place to another. And usually multiple points to multiple other points. And so that can be goods, it can be people, it can be any form of resources. And so from engineering background, systems engineering in particular, you learn about how to sift through complexity and simplify it. And, at its heart, all the work that we do is about adding value to people and organizations that aspire to excellence by enabling them to deal with complexity.
And I'm assuming that's something that's the focus in your consulting business, I would assume, right?
Absolutely is. It's at its heart, it's problem solving, which is why I say once an engineer, always an engineer.
Right.
So even though don't wear that title now, certainly it impacts how clients are served and how teams get built to serve those clients.
Got it. So I talked to you earlier about your humble beginnings, and they were sort of humble. Mm-hmm. You born in Camden, grew up in Willingboro, New Jersey. What would you want to say about your childhood prior to your education?
What I'll say is that it instilled in me both of those, let's call it hometowns. I do still claim both. Instilled in me a deep sense of community because I grew up at a time where, probably like yourselves, you remember being able to go to neighbors and get more than just a cup of sugar, right? There was a level of support, a level of mutuality, reciprocity that has really impacted how I think about everything to this day, including the types of clients that my firm serves.
Well, it was community, really, is what at the bottom of what you're talking about.
That's right. That's right.
And how about your parents? Tell us about your parents and how they influenced you.
I would love to. So my mother and father, Barbara and Louis Walls, were married for 53 years. My father actually just passed in July. And both of them really had a tremendous influence on me. In thinking about you probably asking this question, when I was driving into the studio this morning, I said, we all get so much from our parents, right? And if I was to say, how did they each contribute? I mean, my mother is super organized, super detail-oriented, very curious about things. She's a reader, voracious reader. Didn't go to college, though. But I think from her, those things, the attention to detail, paying attention to others, and then also really just being about a constant learning discipline, that's from her. My father, very decisive, very much a disciplinarian, very much an entrepreneur at heart. Even though the two of them met at Bell Telephone, a place where many people in Philadelphia have kind of had their career journey, he always was doing something on the side in order to make sure that he was thinking ahead and planning for the legacy of his family. And so I've taken that from him. And so when you blend the two, I'm sure there are gaps, but it's a great combination.
And your mother, though she didn't go to college, I think was responsible for your father going to college.
Oh, you remember that? Yes. So, like I said, they met at Bell Telephone, and one of her requirements of him before she would have children was that he go and complete his degree. So he had started at the University of Connecticut right out of high school, played basketball for them, but he left to go to the service. Very valiant thing to do, courageous, brave. So when he came back, he hadn't completed his degree. They fell in love and he wanted to start a family. And she said, you better go get that bachelor's degree.
That's what they say, behind every good man, right?
That's right.
He's a supportive woman.
That's right. So, and he did that in the adult program at LaSalle.
And that education importance has passed on to you, obviously, and to your children. I know you went to University of Virginia, and then you might want to talk about how you got to graduate school from there.
Sure. So the University of Virginia is very unique in the landscape of universities. It appealed to me for one reason because they think about education as a lifelong process from the start. You are not a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. You are a first year, a second year, a third year. So instilling from the very beginning that this is a continuous process, that appealed to me, was supported by merit scholarships there. And for that reason, because performance was strong, got an opportunity with Lockheed Martin as a summer intern, and was fortunate enough to join their engineering leadership development program, and then pursued graduate studies from there.
Right. And through Lockheed, I believe, you began your graduate school, correct?
That's right.
And that was at another very prestigious school.
That was at a small school over in West Philadelphia.
Right.
Yes, University of Pennsylvania.
Oh, not West Philly University.
No.
I'm kidding.
University of Pennsylvania.
Right.
And, listen, I even though, people will appreciate the prestige associated with certain institutions that you're affiliated with, it's all about the experience you have, the people you meet along the way, and how people invest in you. And so I'll call out one in particular, Patrick Harker, who was the former dean of the Wharton School at UPenn, where I completed my MBA. He initially was...
And my alma mater, I have to say, and then the University of Delaware.
That's right. Also. That's right. So, and now president of Philly Fed. But the one quick thing I'll say is, he recognized that there was an opportunity that was being untapped, which was finishing an MBA as well as the engineering masters, and just saw something, in terms of how my mind was tuned, how I was contributing, and just the orientation towards business as well as technology.
That's wonderful.
It's very forward-thinking considering where we are today, right? That foundational background.
And you've been quiet so far today, and I know you have lots of questions for Daria.
Well, and you know me well enough to know, too, that when I am quiet, it's because I am so locked in terms of, our guests and what you're saying. I just, one of the things that did prompt me, though, Daria, was in all the experiences you had, the very high-profile organizations or, academic institutions, what have you brought from that has then, we're going to get into your company in a minute, but when you've had this drive to then maybe participate, being on boards of other entities and kind of bringing service, I think. So where does that come from, the technical side, into how you give back?
Yeah. So there are a lot of ways to do that. And, as I mentioned, the mission of my firm is to really support organizations and people that aspire to excellence, and to equip them, to enable them to do that. And you do that in a number of ways, but ultimately we call our work client service. Service is at the heart of it, right? And so to have that orientation from a professional services standpoint is super important. You can't run a business for as long as I have. We're going into year 20 next year without having that orientation of service.
That's a great stopping off point, and we're going to take a minute break, and we'll be right back on Founders Forum.
You've heard the expression that children are our future. At Giving Cycle, we help young people prepare for that future by experiencing the joy of giving. Giving Cycle puts kids in the driver's seat as philanthropists and social innovators. They decide what issues matter. They select the nonprofits they feel are most deserving of funds, and they suggest ideas for these organizations to have an even greater impact. Giving Cycle helps a student's imagination and generosity come to life in such a magical way. And we make magic in a variety of places. In middle schools, after-school programs, summer camps, and more. To support our work throughout the greater Philadelphia area, please visit www.givingcycle.org. Your contribution will help ignite the future we all deserve.
So we are back on Founders Forum with our guest today, and we left just before the break talking about the topic of customer service and that being the root of, really what any business should stand for. But Daria, I'm really interested in tell our listeners a little bit about, we got your journey, and now what is the actual business that you do, and where are you finding your clients today coming to you for? What's their biggest needs, and how are you serving them?
Sure. So consulting can be a tricky profession to explain because it can mean a lot of different things. But at its heart, it's about solving problems that clients have. In fact, I had a chiropractor once say to me, look, if people didn't have problems with their back, I'd be out of business. So it's the same thing. If organizations or individuals don't have some issue that they're coming to you to the table with, there's nothing to do. Right? So organizations and people are always having problems. It could be a team dynamic that at the executive leadership level that needs to be sifted through, particularly as organizations are looking to map out a succession plan. That's one example. Another could be we're looking over the horizon 5 years down the road. We have no idea what external factors might be influencing our organization, what uncertainties we should be considering. How do we shape a strategic plan in light of all this ambiguity? So that could be another. Another could be, I'm operating a business successfully, but I'm looking to take it to the next level. How do I go from a very transactional business model to one that is more transformational with recurring revenue streams built in, passive revenue streams? So it runs the gamut. But again, I'll come back to this idea of we really look to support organizations who are clear about aspiring to excellence, because that is the standard we set for ourselves. So we look for indicators of that before we will even work with an organization or an individual. Because if you don't have that intention, what's the likelihood you're going to put action behind it?
That's great. That's amazing. I'm thinking about my own company as we talk about that. Excuse me, I'm a little hoarse today. And both in terms of we bring in clients today, financial planning clients, we want to have committed clients that are looking to improve, not just move forward. And at the same time, we're looking at ourselves, a relatively new company, even though we've been in the business long together, about how do we operate at the highest level of excellence as well. So what are your, can you talk about maybe one consulting job generically as at the specific work that you're doing for a company?
Sure. I can speak about one even a little bit more directly. Because it's fairly public. So we're supporting the Community College of Philadelphia now in its strategic planning process. And we're at the point, there's a multi-phase process always involved with shaping strategy. At the beginning, you first want to assure readiness, right? So we do a diagnostic at the beginning just to ensure that there's readiness. The next stage is to kind of look within. That's assessing what your position is, how financially sound are you, what are the assets and liabilities that need to be taken into consideration. Then you look around. That's what's the environmental scan, what's changing around us, that some of which we may not have control over, some things we may. Then you look ahead. That's when you start shaping priorities, setting aspirations very clearly, mapping goals, objectives, and so forth. And then the last stage is look beyond. That used to be something that we did not require clients to do, but we think that's super critical in a strategic planning process.
Beyond ahead.
Well, beyond ahead, right? So what does that mean?
Right.
It means before the engagement is done, mapping out the actions and accountabilities against the early stage priorities and aspirations. Why? Because otherwise, what often happens is that the theoretical never turns into the actual. The conceptual never turns into the pragmatic. So that last step forces you with the client, when you're still embedded, still in support mode, to help them maneuver through and keep that momentum going. And I think that's been a hallmark of our work. And it's why we get recommended from client to client. It is, in fact, why we have this relationship with CCP. Because prior to that, their current board chair worked with us at the Urban League of Philadelphia, which was a previous client.
Another great organization.
Yeah.
Very interesting. This actually, since we're looking ahead, I'd like to ask you about your vision. If this were this date, October in 2024, and you're looking back on the last year, Daria, what would have to happen for you to feel that was a successful year for you? Business, maybe personally, if you want to.
Sure. And I appreciate that you gave the opportunity to say 1, 3, or I think it was 10 was the other choice.
Yep.
And I chose 1. And why is that? It's not that I can't think long term, but I think it's very important to focus on what you can actually put action against. And so this 1-year vision to me feels very, very tangible.
Right.
And the two parts of it, one personal is, I'll just share one facet of it. I'd love to say that I had completed a marathon this time next year. And
Wonderful.
I have one set
Wow.
for April. I attempted it last April, did not successfully complete it. So what did we talk about at the beginning? Sadness, disappointment.
Yes.
I have a different plan in place at this point. So
Nice.
hopefully in October I'll be able to say that happened successfully.
Excellent.
And then on the professional side, would love to continue productizing a number of our services. All right, so what does that mean? Things that can, as we talked about a moment ago, stand alone and provide recurring revenue and allow clients to do self-service, right, which we are so much more accustomed to at this point in our trajectory. Right? People are much more comfortable with technology, much more comfortable with asynchronous learning and delivery of content. And so that's something we've already begun that journey. But next year, this time, I'd love to say that we have productized many more of our services.
In regard to both of those, running a marathon and in regard to productizing your services, what dangers or what obstacles do you see in the way that you have to be careful? Because I know in your consulting business for clients, you're always talking about what can get in the way and what strategies do we have to overcome them. If you could comment on those for you personally and for your business.
Absolutely. Well, starting with the marathon, I guess it's overtraining and possible fatigue. Trying to perfect your approach to the race is something that you can't quite do. You have to leave room for imperfection in your training because you're not a machine.
Yes.
And that ties maybe a little bit to the second point. Speaking of machine learning and AI, the impact that has on professional services is just beginning to be realized. Right. So in a business that is knowledge-based, which mine is, who's providing the knowledge, right? Who's validating the knowledge? If that becomes much more the role of a bot or an algorithm or a machine and people grow more comfortable with that, then you have to think about how am I going to be a companion to now the more trusted source of knowledge and information. We're thinking ahead of that. In fact, I'll be speaking on another panel tomorrow at Blank Rome to the Association of Audit Committee members about what is the impact of AI and audit. Every single professional services field has to think about how it's going to be displaced or how they're going to move ahead and leverage this as a game changer.
A strength.
That's right.
Turn it into a strength. AI is everywhere. We've already had a couple of shows on it, and I'm sure we're going to have more on it. We are running low on time. At some point, and maybe it's another show, we'll talk about your philanthropic work, because I know you do a lot of that, and I was hoping we'd have time for that. But we'd like to end with a couple of fun things. So I'd like to ask you two things. Your favorite song, maybe ask you that first, and also what your favorite reading is, your favorite books.
Sure. So favorite song is definitely Change Is Gonna Come by Sam Cooke. Every time I listen to that song, there's something about it relevant that pops up for me that triggers a thought. And I think in it there is both a sadness and also an optimism.
Some hopefulness.
That's right.
One of my favorites and one of my favorite artists of all time, Sam Cooke. Can listen to him and talk about, you can go from having a party to Change Is Gonna Come to some very sad songs too. And was amazing. Didn't live long enough a life, that's for sure. How about, what are you reading these days?
So, favorite book of all time, and I know you didn't ask me this, but it's relevant to answer your question.
Sure.
Favorite book of all time is called The Medici Effect. Franz Johansson. And what he posits in this book is that innovation comes from the intersection of things. And only when you start looking at those edges between domains and different functions is that where you find the greatest, most novel discoveries. And so how does that tie to what I'm reading now? I'm pushing myself to the edges of what I'm comfortable reading. With several friends of mine, we have started a book club. Not that I've never been part of a book club, but this one in particular, we're pushing the boundaries for ourselves and really discovering some new things. So we actually just finished the book Diva 2.0 by Cheryl Lee Ralph, who's known for her work on the show Abbott Elementary.
Yep.
And fantastic book.
Plays a great character.
Amazing,
too.
yeah.
But here's the thing. We called our book club Divas Read Book Club. And that title, Diva, often is seen as an insult, right, for a woman, particularly a woman who's in a front stage position. But we're adopting Cheryl Lee Ralph's definition, and her definition is that diva is divinely inspired, vicariously alive.
Love it.
Wow.
So
Love it.
let's go with that. Let's push ourselves to
let's
the
change
boundaries
that.
of what's familiar, right?
Change that mindset.
That's right.
That's beautiful.
Well, thank both of my divas for being here today.
That's right.
Appreciate it. Diva
We're
guests.
going to own it.
And thank you all for listening. A great show. Thanks so much, Daria, for being here. Good to see you in person again, Ange. And everyone have a great week, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you so much, Mark.
We hope you enjoyed your time
Make
with
the Healthy
Founders
by
Forum.
Nature